Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. Good to have you here. Today I want to share with you some of the things I learned whilst making a recent music video for the Lost Trades, a song called Keep My Feet Dry. But first, let me ask you, if you've not done so already, please subscribe to this channel. It would really help me out. And also like this video, that would also be really cool. Thank you. So the song is about someone who's recently left an abusive and toxic relationship, so it needed to be treated quite sensitively. We decided as a band that we would keep ourselves out of the narrative for this video, so we hired a couple of actors to play the main roles. One of them was Lee Rose Bailey, and the other was Oliver Lavery. At least one of those has got to be right though, surely. I had this idea to use ivy as a motif throughout the video because it's a plant that's quite destructive. It sort of clings and chokes everything it comes into contact with, and I thought that was quite fitting really for the subject matter. At first I figured we'd have a girl being chased through a forest by her abusive ex. The guy is covered in ivy as a sort of metaphor, I guess, and he uses it to trap her and keep an upper hand in the relationship, kind of like a superpower, which is actually pretty lame now that I come to think of it. So I wrote a kind of script, broke it down into shots, and I sent it to Oliver, one of the actors. He was really helpful, and I'm so glad that I included him at this early stage. Ollie is a professional storyteller and an actor. You know, he kind of knows his beans, and his advice was just invaluable, and it changed everything. One thing I learned from him is to trust your audience. The first draft opened up with a scene where the girl and the ex are kind of exchanging text messages. And that was how I was kind of setting up the situation so that people know that this was an abusive relationship that she's leaving. But Ollie pointed out that scene wasn't really needed, that the mise en scène was kind of enough to sort of convey the situation to the audience. Mise en scène is when things like set dressing and props and even costume and stuff like that, you know, that all plays a part in the telling of the story. For instance, I'd written in a medium shot of a suitcase with a sock hanging out of it, so it looked like it had been packed in a hurry. And in the foreground, you could see the girl's sort of feet sort of jittering a little bit nervously. I also wrote in a close-up of her clutching a rubber plant, and there's a close-up as well of her face sort of looking all anxious, looking off into the distance, you know. All of these clues add up to build a picture so that by the time we see the close-up of the phone and the name popping up with the guy calling her, followed by the 47 missed calls, you know, we kind of know what the situation is. You know, she's clearly running away from this guy, and he's probably not a very nice person. So we bounced the script back and forth for a little while, and eventually the story changed quite dramatically. Actually, it was still the story of a girl who's running away from an abusive relationship and second guessing her decision. But the scenes in the forest where she's running away from this dark, mysterious, featureless figure, those are only happening in her mind. It's actually her own fear and her own doubt that she's battling against. And so the plot became a psychological one rather than a physical one. Which was much better in my mind. Supervillain with the power to control Ivy. That's pretty lame. So about a week before the shoot, I suddenly realised we didn't have anyone to play the girl. Ollie had suggested someone quite early on when we first started talking about it, and stupidly I assumed that was a kind of a done deal, and it was only about a week before when Ollie said, "Hey, have you found anyone to play the role of the girl yet?" And I was like, oh shit. So one thing I learned was to just check everything and make sure everything's in place, because I ended up spending about 5 days stressed out of my brain, sending messages and emails all over the place trying to find someone to play the part. And in the end, you know, we of course we found someone, literally with about 2 or 3 days to go. So we were really lucky. You know, if it hadn't been for that, then we'd have had to cancel the whole thing. And I was so stressed out by the time we came to shooting it, you know, that could have all been avoided just by simply checking much earlier to make sure everyone was on board. But as it turned out, you know, we really lucked out with Lee. Lee was really great. She's a theatre actor and she's never done camera work before, so it took her a little while to sort of get the hang of the more subtle kind of approach to acting on camera. But she got the hang of it really quick. And looking back, it must have been a real challenge for her because I'd broken up the whole story into different shots to make it more economical on the day of the shoot. So it meant that she was like switching back and forth between different scenes, different moods. You know, she would be terrified one minute and then angry the next minute, you know, and that must have been quite hard for her, but she did a cracking job. So I spent about 2 days before the shoot just making absolutely sure I had everything, and double checking and checking again and checking again to make sure I had all the props and all the scripts and all the shot list organised and all my camera equipment and stuff like that, because then it meant I'd have less to worry about on the actual day and I could just completely focus on the shoot. I'd always planned to shoot this footage on my own, but a couple of days before I had a bit of a crisis of confidence, so I called up a couple of videographer friends of mine to see if they'd be available to come and shoot it. Of course they were busy, so they couldn't come and help, which meant that I had to shoot it. I had no choice. And I'm kind of glad that it worked out that way, actually, because in the end it turned out okay. I'd learned a whole bunch of lessons whilst making a short back in May on my own, and I'd taken those lessons and applied them to this project. And one of the biggest lessons that I learned from that short film was to make sure to check the white balance, which sounds like a really obvious thing to any filmmaker. But it's not a habit that I was into for a while. I didn't really understand it, so I made sure that I went out and I did some research so that I really understood the subject, or as best as I could anyway, so that when it came to the day I kind of knew what I was doing. And I went out and I bought myself one of these for testing the white balance, and that actually turned out to be pretty useful. So on the day I made sure I took the time to make sure that every shot was just how I wanted it to be. Before I even pressed record, I just made absolutely sure that everything was as spot on as I could make it. And I'm really, really glad that I took that time to do that, because when I got the footage back to the studio and uploaded it into the software and did some quick sort of some color grades just to see what it looked like, I was actually quite pleasantly surprised. Taking that extra time had made such a difference, and that, as an added bonus, it had really boosted my confidence with regards to my camera work. It's not something I was particularly confident about, but after bringing this footage back, you know, I knew that I could do this, and it just made me more confident about approaching other people now to start working on their projects. So yeah, watch this space. The day of the shoot went really well. I'd organised the script into a shot list and into an order that meant that I didn't have to keep changing lenses and keep changing different camera setups and stuff. You know, I could shoot everything with one lens in one hit, and then change the setup and shoot everything in that setup. And it just saved so much time on the day. It rained quite a bit in the morning, but I was kind of prepared for most eventualities. I'd taken along a big tarpaulin, and we were able to use that and sort of hide it behind a tree and just keep everything covered, keep everything nice and dry. Yeah, so I'm really glad I did that. I took along my son Noah on the day to help out with a bunch of stuff. He like loaded the clapperboard and I assisted with props and continuity and that kind of thing. He was really, really helpful to have him around. I was kind of hoping to have a few more people helping out, but Noah was the only one that was available, and so he ended up doing lots and lots of different jobs on the day, and he did very well. He was knackered at the end of it, mind. The clapperboard turned out to be a really useful, cheap investment too, because it meant that sorting through the footage when I got home, I could see straight away, just looking at the thumbnails on the computer, you know, exactly what scene it was, which shot, what take, you know, and it just really saved so much time with organising all the footage into folders. It was a real godsend. All in all, the day went from about 9 a.m. to about 7 p.m. It was a pretty long day, but you know, we got so much done during that time, and it got pretty much everything we needed. I did have to go out and shoot a couple of extra bits. I had to go out and shoot the bus pulling up, because there were no buses pulling up at the time that we needed them to pull up. So how rude. And I went out and I reshot the scene at the end with the phone falling off the bench. We did originally just shoot a scene on the day with just this phone ringing on the bench, and it was just a fade out from there, but it didn't really look right. You know, it didn't seem like a good enough finish. It wasn't final enough, and it didn't to me convey the fact that she had just like completely dismissed this person as being no longer important or a part of her life. And I felt that, you know, having it sort of ringing but vibrating until it finally falls off the bench, that just seemed better to me. So that's what I did. I used invisible thread, and it took a few attempts to sort of pull it off and make it look like it was vibrating. And by the way, invisible thread is not invisible. They lied. So speaking of the invisible thread, for the hoodie drop scene, we went out and we did some tests first. When I tested it, I got Noah to dress up in this black hoodie. I got him to position himself in a particular way, and took the footage from that. And then we set up some railings, and using the invisible thread, we strung up the hoodie so that it was in roughly the same sort of position. And then we just cut the invisible thread so that the hoodie drops to the floor, which sounds simple, right? I mean, the test went okay, and then we went to do it on the day, and at first appearances, it went really well. The hoodie dropped exactly like we wanted it to. But when I got the footage back to the studio and looked at it, at the moment that we cut the thread, a big beam of sunlight just swept across the whole scene and changed the light completely. So it meant that it just didn't look right. It looked awful. So we went out and shot it again. This time I took my other son Eli. We went out somewhere more local this time because petrol was not getting any cheaper. And we picked a cloudy day so that the sunlight wouldn't be such a problem. This time around we set the hoodie up first because it's easier to position someone into the position that you need than it is to position a hoodie or an item of clothing with this invisible string into the position that that person was in, if that makes sense. So we did it that way around. And, it should have gone really well, but for some reason, it took about 3 or 4 attempts because whenever we cut the invisible thread, just a part of it would drop, the arm would drop, or just the hood would drop. And I've no idea why it just kept sticking the way it did, but it did. But eventually we got it. Took a little while. I took it back to the studio. It all looked good, pretty good. It took me a little while to color match that scene with the rest of the footage because it was a different forest. There was different colors. It took a little while to sort of match it as close as I could, and it's not anywhere near perfect. All the same, I think we got away with it until now. Next, it was a simple matter of just getting the guys together for a performance shoot. We used a wedding barn near Malmesbury, a lovely big open space, and I borrowed my brother's lights so that I could light this up a little bit more cinematically. I wanted a large space for this part because I wanted to sort of contrast with the claustrophobia of the forest, and I wanted it to be nice and sort of bright and light, again to sort of contrast with the darkness, not only of the forest itself, but of the theme in general. I kind of needed the performance bits just to sort of lighten things up a bit. I didn't want it to be too dark. I used a 3-point lighting setup to light this up. Instead of using a fill light though, I used negative fill, which is when you sort of you just create shadow on the camera side of the face, just to kind of add a little bit more contrast, a little bit more drama. And I used the rim light to sort of enhance what the windows in the background were kind of doing. And I think it will look rather nice. Eli helped out with the camera because I was busy in front of the camera doing my rockstar thing. And then it was back to the studio for editing. And again, I was so happy with what I'd shot. Just paying attention to all the details on the day and making sure that every shot looked just right. Really taking that time to set everything up properly. Made such a difference when I brought it back to the studio because color correcting it and color grading it was made so much easier. So yeah, give myself top marks for that. So what did I learn from this shoot? Just reiterations of lessons I learned from previous projects, I guess. Instead of learning how not to do things, I kind of learned how to do things right, if that makes any sense. It made me feel really good to see a definite and significant improvement in my work this time around. It's boosted my confidence no end, particularly from the camera work side of things and the editing side of things too. I'm really proud of the way this video turned out. It wouldn't have turned out anywhere near as good as it did if it hadn't been for all the mistakes I made on the previous projects. In particular, the short film that I made recently, back in May, I shot that on my own, and I had no idea really how to use my camera. And that was the project that I learned how to use my camera. I learned all about the importance of white balance and making sure that it's set in 4K or 1080p, depending on what it is that you need. And those were really important lessons. But I'll be talking more about that short film and the experience I had in making that at some other point. I won't bore you with that today. That's for another video. And I guess if I did make any mistakes on this project, I'd say probably it was it was not consistently checking the footage every time we shot a scene. You know, I'd check to make sure that we had it, but I didn't really check all the details necessarily. I mean, if I had, I would have noticed that hoodie drop scene hadn't actually worked because of the changing of the light, and we could have just strung it up and reshot it there and then, instead of me having to go out days later and then having to kind of try and reshoot it in a different location and then trying to match it color wise in the editing suite. That would have saved me a little bit of time. I also learned to not go on assumptions. Check, double check, triple check that, you know, you got all your props, everything is in place, everyone is in place, and everyone knows what they're doing, that kind of thing. Because, you know, I had to run around sending out emails and messages and just getting so stressed out in the last couple of days leading up to the shoot, you know, when I could have been spending that time getting better prepared for the actual day. So that was a really important lesson for me. So that's it from me today. Don't forget to subscribe, that would be super duper. And if you're feeling frivolous, then like this video too, that would be awesome. I'll see you next time. Cheers.